For more on the data, we want to bring in Peter Earle. He is senior economist at the American Institute for Economic Research, and former Treasury official Kitty Richards, who is a senior fellow at Groundwork Collaborative. Peter, why don't we start with you, because you were anticipating that the numbers would be a little hotter than the consensus estimate. I think it's even hotter than what you were looking for.
Yeah, and I mean, to get right to the heart of the matter, it's clear to me that the Fed stopped raising rates too early. The Fed funds rate right now, policy rate's about 5.3%. Annualized core inflation, this is CPI, but 3.6%, which would put the inflation-adjusted policy rate at 1.7%. If you go to the Fed's website, they're calling the natural rate of interest like 0.9%. That's between 0.7 and 1.1, which suggests that top policy is too tight by between 50 and 100 basis points. But guess what? Prices are still rising, and for the past few months, they've accelerated. So I strongly believe that the Fed's estimate of the natural rate of interest is low by a few hundred basis points, and for that reason, U.S. monetary policy is still way too loose.
Kitty, I think you had the opposing viewpoint before we got these numbers today, the idea that higher interest rates weren't necessary to bring inflation down, but this kind of flies in the face of that.
You know, thanks, Becky. I think the thing to focus on here is whether the policy interest rates that we currently have are actually solving the inflation problem, or whether they're just causing pain for households and increasing the affordability problem. So, you know, if you look at inflation and CPI over the last few months, we do have a persistent problem in shelter inflation. And beyond that, inflation is pretty much under control. I think the big question is, do we need to see longer and higher interest rates? Or was this a supply issue all along that's working its way through? It is taking time. Also, there are huge corporate profits being pulled in that could come down in order to bring prices down. I'd like to see us talking about reversing the corporate tax cuts of the Trump era, rather than thinking about continuing to make it more difficult for families to buy cars, afford their mortgage, make their student loan payments, et cetera, which is the true direct effect of high policy interest rates.
Hey, Kitty, no argument that higher interest rates do make it more expensive if you're trying to get a mortgage, if you're trying to get a car loan or something along those lines, make student loans, as you mentioned. But the reason for higher interest rates is to try and tamp demand in the economy, to try and slow things down. And that, in turn, is basically the only tool that the Fed has to try and rein in inflation. You say that inflation is only a problem when you look at housing. That's not the case. There's a front page story in the Wall Street Journal today that says that aluminum and cardboard prices keep getting more expensive. So do health insurance and wages. And as a result, small business owners are really getting caught in this trap, not knowing what to do and where to turn next. I mean, I don't know what you think the tool is to bring down inflation if it's not higher interest rates.
Yeah, I certainly did not mean to leave the impression that the only problem in inflation is housing. It is, however, a huge driver of the inflation that we're still seeing. And again, I think the question is this tool effective and is it working? If we really have a supply problem that needs to work its way through, how much pain would we need to cause on the demand side in order to bring inflation down further? Recalling that it has dropped dramatically from its highs over the last few years. And so, you know, it's really time that we think about, is this medicine causing more harm than good? Are the side effects worth the cure?
Kitty, how does raising corporate tax rates bring down inflation and make it easier for families to buy goods? How does that work?
I mean, for one thing, it reduces the incentive for corporate profiteering. There are a lot of economists that talk about excess profits taxes in these times of, you know, unusual supply restriction. We should also talk about the fact that we just have a corporate profits tax that we cut by 14 percentage points directly before the pandemic started. And that had to contribute to some of the corporate profiteering that we saw over the course of the pandemic. Also, you know, the Fed has limited tools, but there's been a lot of talk about the fiscal side of tamping down inflation, and tax policy is a big part of that.